Americans in general have lost trust in institutions, but the trend is especially notable among the young. Gen Z, people between ages 13 and 28, have less faith in government, media, the military, and even democracy itself. There is also a partisan shift among young people, even within Gen Z, as the younger cohort has become more conservative. So Tara, why do you think Gen Z has lost faith in American government, politics, and institutions?
First and foremost, I think they have because they've been given unrealistic expectations. If you look at sort of everything from, play as children, let's say you're on, your local soccer team and you're not the greatest player, you still get an award anyway. You're still told, hey, you're really good, we're really proud of you, et cetera. And some of that is a good thing. But what it does build up when it becomes a part of everything you do, when you go to school and, you don't have to turn an assignment in on time, you can do it during your recapture class. What that does is then it sets up the expectation that everything's going to be good, things are not going to be hard, and someone's always got a solution for you. And I think as you add to that the problems that were created by COVID, the sense of isolation, et cetera. So I think young people are, especially in that cohort, they're reaching sort of 18, 19, 20 years old with an expectation of a world that's always going to be supportive, a world that's always going to have answers for them, a world where they're going to be able to do things in the way that they've done before in terms of there being enough money and that sort of thing. And the reality is that's not the real world. And I think then that translated into, for example, the lack of support for President Biden in the election because the Democrats sort of promised all of these things and then they didn't come through with them.
I wonder, Bob, if one reason that young people have lost faith in institutions is that old people screwed up.
That's certainly a part of it, and it is fundamental, I think, in the generations that the younger generation blames the older generation for whatever circumstances or maladies face society. And not that that's an unfair criticism, but I view this in a somewhat different way. Faith in government generally began to take a nosedive in the 1960s and 70s. The Vietnam War, Watergate scandal, economic malaise. So there were things that happened that government did or that implicated government that eroded people's trust in government. Trust in government hit a new high point after 9/11, when the country kind of came together and there was a sense that it was, fighting terrorism and everything that was accompanying 9/11. But something's happened in the last 10 to 15 years of a fundamentally different nature, which is office holders and office seekers increasingly denigrating the very government that they want to run. And running against the government has become de rigueur, especially, I would say, on the right, though to some degree on the left. And I think that escalated markedly with Donald Trump's campaign approach, which was to essentially denigrate every American institution, the media, the courts when they do things he doesn't like, Congress, congressional leaders, and the kind of rhetoric that he uses. And people take political cues from their leaders. And I think those cues filter down even, whether you like Trump or don't like Trump.
You mentioned the counterculture and Vietnam, kind of where I think that counterculture term started to bubble up. And now we've sort of had a flip where the Democratic Party seems to be the more establishment party in some ways. So I'm wondering whether to be if you're young and you want to be, counterculture, you go the other way. What do you think? Is that a crazy theory, or?
Well, I certainly think that since Socrates blamed Plato, that older people have been blaming younger people for not being good enough. And certainly the greatest generation did that to the boomers, and the boomers turned out. The boomers turned out. But so I think we can overtake that, and it's also a very short period that we're looking at. I do think that COVID had something to do with this. I also think we're at the very beginnings of the social media revolution, and we have put no guardrails on that yet. And it may be that for Gen Alpha or whatever comes after that, we're going to put some guardrails on social media. Jonathan Haidt's got a new book out that's saying it's social media that's a problem. So I'm a little wary of saying this early that there's a problem. Certainly my students are in this generation, and I don't see that it's a problem with them. So I think maybe overarchingly it is, but my own experience is that no, they're doing just fine.
I'm glad you mentioned social media. There's been some sense that it's a particular platform that's caused some of this issue, lack of trust, which is TikTok. Michael, does that hold any water for you?
That may be true, but I want to go back to the FDR moment, right? In terms of, a couple of you guys mentioned FDR, right? And this president. FDR created policies and legislation to get us out of a depression. This man is creating policies to get us into a depression. So I just want to put that out there. So, right. So one thing that he has done that's good, to speak to an earlier question, is he gave $100 million for scholarships to HBCUs and land-grant institutions. However, when you speak with some black Gen Zers that I do from time to time or listen to their focus groups, they have concerns. They want to know why he gives pennies to HBCUs, but at the same time, they want to know why he puts policies and practices in place that are going to hurt them and their grandparents down the road, right? They want to know why he's going to do things that are going to affect jobs, income, housing, health care, life expectancy, prenatal care, and the wide disparities in health, education, and welfare. They want to know these things. About a month ago, I was at the National Council of Black Studies annual conference, and I went to a policy panel presentation that was put on by students from HBCUs. And their professors were admonishing them to keep their eyes not on the distractions of the cape, but to keep their eyes on the sword and the matador, right? So I know that Donald Trump thinks that black people are low IQ people, as he's repeatedly said, coming out of that Charles Murray psychology. But you can't fool people all the time. You can't give pennies to an HBCU and go out and dismantle DEI. You can't give pennies to an HBCU and undermine CRT. You can't kick black history out of schools and destroy the civil rights division of the Department of Justice. And you can't undo affirmative action, and black people are not going to pay attention.
Let's swing this to over to Sarah, and on the Gen Z issue, is there a way to restore trust?
Well, I was struck by some of the polling, which shows that young people, very few really have a sense of community, of belonging, and especially poor young people, as well as people who haven't gone to college, actually also those who are less engaged in politics. So actually identifying with a political party makes you feel like you're belonging to something. But this goes back to the classic Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone, right? Which is this sort of hollowing out of civil society, of organizations that connect us to one another, real people, not online, and that those organizations sort of indirectly connect to the state. So these sort of mediating organizations. And he notes the decline in membership in things like the Elks Clubs and bowling leagues. And his thesis, which was, probably 20 years ago now, still holds a lot of water. There's still declining numbers of people who join organizations. And so I think there's something to the fact, like not feeling part of a community, belonging, it doesn't make you engaged in politics, right? You're not gonna go and join a protest if you don't have a friends and group that are doing the same thing. So maybe, with everything that's going on politically, maybe young people will get more engaged and find in civic life something that they're missing in terms of this feelings of isolation and lack of connection.
When you mentioned Bowling Alone, and the lack of civic engagement, in a way that swings back towards social media again, because it's so easy to get absorbed in whatever platform of choice you have. And I'm wondering, Tara, if you see social media, I don't really hate to be beating up on social media because I tell it to my kids all the time, but the role that it plays.
Oh, absolutely. Most students get all of their information from social media. If you ask them, what news site did you go to, they'll say, TikTok or Instagram, or I saw it on Facebook, unless you specifically give them an example of, no, this is what I mean, go to Politico or something of that sort. Many of them really don't think of that as a news source. They think of the social media outlets they go to as their news source. So absolutely that is a part of it. And also there is a lack of understanding of how government works and their part in it. And that's I think is a big part of this as well, is they don't really see themselves as part of our governing structure.
Michael?
Maybe someone should call it Scrolling Alone. They should write a new book.
That's a good one. That's your next book.
That's a great title.
I think a couple of weeks ago I asked my students, one of them sitting over there, Alana Dwyer over there, I asked the question, I said, can you tell me the difference between a public servant and a politician? no one raised their hand because that conceptualization is not part of what they understand. So I let them know that generally speaking, a politician does what? Puts party before country, and the inverse for a public servant. But I was amazed when they cannot tell me the distinction between a public servant and a politician, because for them, their lifetime, all they've seen are self-serving politicians. They don't know what a public servant is.
Back to, we're talking about media and lack of trust in institutions, one of which is media, of course. And I read an interesting article recently that said that young people often fact check them. The way they will fact check something is by the comments and whatever the article may be or what someone's posted. So there's a sort of group, a collective decision being made as, okay, this is good or this isn't good or this is true or this isn't true. And of course, that's not the way traditional media would work. So just a different approach, let's say.